Hello and welcome. To me, flying boats and float planes are the most graceful of all aircraft. Their early popularity was due to the fact that there were no airports or airfields, just paddocks, a stretch of water fit for purpose. The difference between a flying boat and a float plane is that a flying boat has a single hull on which it comes to rest. A float plane has floats or pontoons which keep the body out of the water. Flying boats were some of the largest aircraft in the early 20th century and were popular with international airlines in the interwar period. In 1910, Frenchman Henry Fabre flew the first successful powered seaplane. The first hydro aeroplane competition was held in Monaco in March of 1912. Aircraft using floats manufactured by Fabre, Curtis, Tellier and Farman. Francois Denhall constructed the first seaplane with a fuselage forming a hull using various designs to give hydrodynamic lift at takeoff. American pioneering aviator Glenn Curtiss developed his float plane into the successful Curtiss Model D. Combining floats with wheels, he made the first amphibian flights in February of 1911 and was awarded the first Collier Trophy for US flight achievement. His experiments with a hulled seaplane resulted in the 1913 Model E and Model F, which he called flying boats. In 1913, the Daily Mail newspaper put up a £10,000 prize for the first non-stop flight across the Atlantic. American businessman Rodman Wanamaker determined that the prize should go to an American aircraft and commissioned the Curtiss Airplane and Motor Company to design and build an aircraft capable of making the flight. Curtiss's development of the flying fish flying boat brought him into contact with John Cyril Port, a retired Royal Navy lieutenant, aircraft designer and test pilot, who was to become an influential British aviation pioneer. Many of the earlier accidents were attributable to a poor understanding of handling while in contact with the water. They worked to develop a practical hull design to make the transatlantic crossing possible. At the same time, the British boat building firm J. Samuel White of Cowes on the Isle of Wight set up a new aircraft division and produced a flying boat in the United Kingdom. A collaboration between the S.E. Saunders Boatyard of East Cowes and the Sopwith Aviation Company produced the Bat Boat, an aircraft with a laminated hull that could operate from land or on water, which today we call an amphibious aircraft. In the US, Wanamaker's commission built on Glenn Curtiss's previous development and experience with the Model F for the US Navy. Trials of the aircraft America began on June 1914. The nose of the aircraft tried to submerge as engine power increased. Curtiss's earlier designs didn't have such powerful engines nor large loads and so were relatively more buoyant. Curtiss fitted fins to the sides of the bow to add hydrodynamic lift, but soon replaced these with sponsons. These and the flared notched hull would remain a prominent feature of flying boat hull design in the decades to follow. Curtiss and Port's plans were interrupted by the outbreak of World War I. Port persuaded the British Admiralty to purchase the America from Curtiss, followed by an order for 12 more similar aircraft. At Felixstowe, Port made advances in flying boat design and developed a practical hull design with the distinctive Felixstowe notch. Port modified a H4 with a new hull whose improved hydrodynamic qualities made taxiing, takeoff and landing much more practical, and he called it the Felix F1. Port's innovation of the Felixstowe notch enabled the craft to overcome suction from the water more quickly and break free for flight much more easily. The notch breakthrough evolved into the step, with the rear section of the lower hull sharply recessed above the forward lower hull section, and that characteristic became a feature of both flying boat hulls and seaplane floats. Port's final design at the seaplane experimental station was the 123-foot span, 5-engined Felixstowe Fury triplane. Meanwhile, the pioneering flying boat designs of Francois Denhall had been steadily developed by the Franco-British Aviation Company into a range of practical craft. Smaller than the Felixstowe, several thousand FBAs were used by almost all of the Allied forces as reconnaissance craft patrolling the North Sea, Atlantic and Mediterranean Oceans. In Italy, several seaplanes were developed. The Macchi M5 in particular was extremely manoeuvrable and agile and matched the land-based aircraft it had to fight. In September 1919, British company Supermarine started operating the first flying boat service in the world from Woolston to Le Havre in France, but that was not a success. 4 Curtiss NC-4s attempted to fly across the Atlantic Ocean in 1919 via the Azores, only one completing the flight. In 1923, the first successful commercial flying boat service was introduced with flights to and from the Channel Islands. In 1928, 4 Supermarine Southampton flying boats of the RAF Far East Flight arrived in Melbourne, Australia. The flight was considered proof that flying boats had evolved to become reliable means of long-distance transport. In the 1930s, flying boats made it possible to have regular air transport between the US and Europe, opening up new air travel routes to South America, Africa and Asia. The Pan Am Boeing 314 Clipper planes brought exotic destinations like the Far East within reach of air travellers. By 1931, mail from Australia was reaching Britain in just 16 days, less than half the time taken by sea. In that year, government tenders invited applications to run new passenger and mail services between the ends of the British Empire, and Qantas and IAL were successful. Their merger became the Qantas Empire Airways. The new 10-day service between Rose Bay in New South Wales, near Sydney, and Southampton was such a success that the volume of mail was exceeding aircraft storage space. This was resolved by the British government, who in 1933 had requested aviation manufacturer Short Brothers to design a long-range monoplane. Qantas agreed to the initiative and undertook to purchase 6 of the new short S-23C class or Empire flying boats. Sir Alan Cobham devised a method of in-flight refuelling which in 1930s was meant that in the air the short Empire could be loaded with more fuel than it could take off with. A Handley Page HP-54 Harrow was used as the fuel tanker. The German Dornier DOX flying boat was noticeably different from its UK and US built counterparts. The enormous DOX was powered by 12 engines and once carried 170 people as a publicity stunt. The Dornier Wal was easily the greatest commercial success in the history of marine aviation. Over 250 were built. The military value of flying boats was well recognised, and every country bordering on water operated them at the outbreak of World War II. They were used in various tasks from anti-submarine patrol, air-sea rescue and gunfire spotting for battleships. Aircraft such as the PBM Mariner patrol bomber, PBY Catalina, Short Sunderland and Grumman Goose recovered downed airmen and operated as scout aircraft over the vast distances of the Pacific Theatre and the Atlantic. They also sunk numerous submarines and located enemy ships. In May 1941, the German battleship Bismarck was spotted by a PBY Catalina. During World War II, the RAAF, under the banner of Qantas, operated Catalinas on the 30-hour double sunrise route between Perth and Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. This maintained the vital link between Australia and London. The largest flying boat of the war was the Blohm & Voss BV-238, the heaviest plane to fly during World War II and the largest aircraft built and flown by any of the Axis powers. When Italy entered the war in June 1940, BOAC and Qantas operated the horseshoe route between Durban and Sydney using short Empire flying boats. They had to avoid the Mediterranean. The Martin Company produced the prototype XPB-2M Mars based on their PBM Mariner patrol bomber. The Mars was converted by the Navy into a transport aircraft. After World War II, the use of flying boats rapidly declined as the reliability, speed, and range of land-based aircraft increased. The commercial competitiveness of flying boats diminished because their design compromised aerodynamic efficiency and speed to accomplish the feat of waterborne take-off and landings. They were unable to compete with new civilian jet aircraft like the de Havilland Comet and Boeing 707, proved impossible. The Hughes H4 Hercules, in development in the US during the war, was even larger than the BV-238. The Spruce Goose, as the 180-ton H4 was nicknamed, disparagingly known as the flying lumberyard, for it was made of so much wood. And this was the largest flying boat ever to fly. In 1947, on its only flight, it flew a mile at just 70 feet height. The Royal Air Force began development of a small jet-powered flying boat that it intended to use as an air defence aircraft optimised for the Pacific. By making the aircraft jet-powered, it was possible to design it with a hull rather than making it a float plane. The Saunders Roe SRA-1 prototype first flew in 1947 and was relatively successful in terms of its performance and handling, though it was realised that carrier-based aircraft were more practical. During the Berlin airlift, Sunderlands and Hythes were used to transport goods, particularly salt, their airframes already protected against corrosion from seawater. The US Navy continued to operate flying boats such as the Martin P-5M Marlin until the late 1960s. The Navy even attempted to build a jet-powered seaplane bomber, the Martin Seamaster. BOAC ceased flying boat services out of Southampton in November 1950. Ansett Australia operated a flying boat service from Rose Bay to Lord Howe Island until 1974 using short Sandringhams. The shape of the Short Empire, a British flying boat of the 1930s, was a harbinger of the shape of future 20th century aircraft. Today, flying boats have largely been replaced by seaplanes with floats and amphibious aircraft with wheels. The Berrieff BE-200 twin-jet amphibious aircraft is one of the closest living descendants of the earlier flying boats, along with the larger amphibious planes used for fighting forest fires. There are also several experimental or kit amphibians, such as the Volma, Sportsman, Quick Kit, Glass Goose, Air Max, C-Max, Aeropractica A24 and Seawind 300C. The Shin Meiwa US-2 large STOL amphibious aircraft is designed for air-sea rescue work and is operated by the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force. The Canadair CL-215 and successor Bombardier 415 are examples of modern flying boats and are used for forest fire suppression. In 2010, Dornier announced plans to build CD-2 Sea Star composite flying boats in Quebec, Canada, and this may come about by 2021. The Chinese state-owned Aviation Industry Corporation of China launched a massive new AVIC AG600 amphibious airplane which will be operational by 2022. The Icon A5 is an amphibious aircraft in the light sport class. The Progressive Aerodyne Siri is an amphibious aircraft in the light sports class too, available as a kit-build, experimental or factory-built aircraft. Thank you for watching.